All right, hello. Everyone can hear me well? Yes, all right. Hi, I'm Joao Oliveira. Thank you for coming today. Thank you for being here to talk about how to work productively with teams across studios and countries. Now, I want to be conscious, this is a 3 p.m. talk. You're already starting to get a bit tired, so I prepared an easygoing start for you, okay? So I decided we're going to start by watching a movie. So I picked this movie about this game developer named Sam. And it's the end of day on Friday, and the sun is shining outside. Sam is already thinking about everything she's going to do this weekend. But suddenly, a message from Casey. That's someone she has never met before. So she checks his profile, and it turns out it's someone on a different studio, on the other side of the globe, actually. And Casey has just seen Sam's message on the game channel about this new feature that Sam's team has been working on already for the past 2 months. And it turns out Casey's team has already been working on a very similar feature for the longest time, and they're already getting ready to get it shipped. So Sam needs to make a decision. What's she going to do with her team's work? And she knows she needs to schedule a meeting, right? So of course, Casey is gonna need to be there. She wants to talk to him, but who else needs to be there? It's a bit hard to know, right? The decision process is unclear. So Sam decides, okay, let's get the engineers in. I mean, they're gonna have to figure out the details. We should also get the designers from both sides because, well, they need to know the impact, right? And you might as well throw in the producers, right, to get things going. But with all these people there, okay, let's get the director as well, right? Cool. So this makes it a bit difficult to schedule, but what Sam doesn't know is actually a few of these people are across different time zones. And what that means is when she looks for a spot, the next available slot for everyone is 3 weeks from that day. So Sam knows what's happening. It's not her first rodeo. She has to do it outside her working hours. Great. So even after she made that decision, it's going to be okay. Still, the earliest slot is 1 week from then. And it's at 6 a.m. So 1 week later, Sam wakes up, 5:55, she's at the couch, and she starts the call, and some time passes. 6:05, nobody's there. So she decides to check Slack. Of course. Casey had a last-minute conflict, and he had to cancel the meeting. Does this sound familiar to you? We've been through similar situations before, haven't we? And it sucks. I mean, it sucks so much that you just start thinking, why do we do this to ourselves? Like, maybe co-dev was not a great idea to begin with? Do you remember these days? That was nice, right? I mean, everyone was in the same room. If you had a question about anything in the game, you could just shout to the guy next to you. Also, you want to change anything? Everyone just get around very quickly and we decide right here. Can't we just go back to that one? Short answer is no. Otherwise, I wouldn't be making this talk. But at least not most of us. Definitely I cannot. So we're already at a point where for a lot of people, their entire careers has been complete co-dev. And I'm one of them. And I want to talk about it very quickly so you get an idea of where I'm coming from. So I started as Ubisoft Sofia I started in Ubisoft Sofia as a gameplay programmer working for Assassin's Creed Syndicate with the lead studio in Quebec. And for this one, we just joined in the last few months. We were doing bug fixing and polish. Then I worked on Assassin's Creed Origins, and the collaboration here was a bit longer. We did a lot more gameplay features, so I saw a bit more of like how different co-dev arrangements work for these different features. Right before the end of Origins, I got promoted to lead gameplay programmer. That gave me a bit more insight into the actual details of the co-dev deals. And soon after, I started working on Skull and Bones with the lead studio in Singapore. Now, I guess the biggest difference was it was a whole new IP. So it's very different to make a game for an established franchise and a whole new IP. And of course, co-dev for each of those is completely different. Now, the flip side of that is that actually that felt like an interesting problem to me. I was curious about it. Can I do something? Is there something to improve here? I was so curious, I decided to move to Singapore and to continue working on the same project, but on the other side. And at some point, I became the lead for 3Cs. So as you can imagine, the scope was quite big, and we had to have co-dev deals for a lot of it. And I worked particularly close with Montreal, Chengdu, Paris, and Belgrade. And what was really illuminating was all these problems I thought were super clear when I was on the collab studio. Suddenly, when I arrive on the other side, I still don't know how to solve them. They're pretty complicated, actually. And finally, we're reaching my current position at Riot Games Singapore. I'm an engineering manager on Teamfight Tactics, and the lead studio for that project is Los Angeles. So at Riot, I started on a newly formed team, and the project is also relatively new to co-dev. And it means we're at a stage where we're still figuring out how we're working together. And that's kind of exciting to me. There's a lot of stuff to try. Cool, that's about it. That's my share of adventures in co-dev land. But I didn't really answer your question, right? Why can't we go back to the good old days? The only thing I answered is that I cannot, which is sad, but what about everyone else? So let's talk a little bit about development complexity. It's a loose term. Think about how complex it is to develop a video game. And let's try to picture how development complexity grows over time. And I think it's something like this. So it continually goes up, and every now and then there's some kind of leap, and it goes up faster. And if you think of pretty much any long-standing series, I think this is kind of easy to see. Think of Tears of the Kingdom, the amount of stuff you can do there versus what you could do in the first Legend of Zelda. And this is human nature, isn't it? We want to try new things. We want to try to do more and more, reach new highs. And I just want to be clear, this development complexity is not the only way to reach new highs. We see that all the time. There's definitely ways to do that in a different context. The point I'm trying to make is that the tendency is for there to be more and more people in high development complexity conditions. And that's great, because you can come to my talk. Okay, so we've established development complexity is increasing on average, but what's the exact connection between that and co-dev? And I can think of a few reasons. So the first one is what I just said. There's more and more people, right? So where are you going to get these people? Typically, you get them from big hubs in video games. That's the UK, California, Quebec. But let's think about it a bit more. The reason you traditionally get it is because the talent pool in those hubs is bigger, right? What we're not seeing is that more and more that pool is very saturated. It's people already working for their dream companies, already having their dream jobs. While in non-hubs, maybe that's not the case. Maybe there's people that want to be in the games industry and cannot, or maybe they're not working for a company they particularly like. So this is actually a better representation of reality. And it's one of the reasons why companies actually are investing in emerging markets. Cool. Besides more people, it's also about the specialization of these people. And if you think about it, think about pretty much any topic in game dev today, you can go really deep. And if you want to go even deeper, you cannot do that with a new team. You need people that have been working on this problem for many years together. So let's say your company is working on your next game and it's decided you're going to do it for mobile as well. But nobody in your studio knows how to work for mobile. Yes, you can hire people, you can train the existing people to learn about mobile development. But what's more cost effective, to do that or to knock on the door of this studio that has been doing it for 10 years and really knows what they're doing? And I can think of an example particularly close to me. Singapore is known within Ubisoft as the studio for water tech and water gameplay. And finally, the other thing is increased development complexity should always mean increased need for diversity. And I just want us all to agree with a simple statement: diverse teams make better games. So co-dev is a simple way to achieve that. Just by having different studios participate in the product, you're naturally getting input from different backgrounds. So you get a better outcome. Okay, so hopefully this gives us some idea of why there is some tendency in the past few years for more and more co-dev. But we're still in this situation, right? So let's try to fix that. This talk today, I hope will help a little bit. But before we go ahead, I really want to tell you something. Codev is all going to be about putting that extra effort. And pretty much everything I'm going to talk about today will require that extra effort. So it's not going to be for free, but I promise you it's going to be worth it. Now, just like training for a competition, focus is key. You don't want to be training all these muscles, right, that do different things. You want to train the muscles that give you the best outcome for your competition. And I'm very far from an Olympic athlete, but I have been practicing this sport for a little bit already, so I've seen a few things that work and a few things that don't. And let's talk about them. So I tend to think of them as steps of a pyramid, and the reason is that I realize they're not all the same. So there's many things you can do, but if you have problems at the lower levels, you need to try to fix those first. Let's talk about the first one. That's motivation. And there's no way you can set up a codev partnership unless if both sides know why they're in this partnership to begin with. It's supposed to be a mutually beneficial relationship, right? And maybe this sounds a bit silly, but this actually happens quite often because for the vast majority of us, we're not going to be the ones signing the deals and know the exact details of why we wanted to get in it. We're going to be the ones executing them further down the line. So, how does this look when this is not solid? In my experience, it's actually very visible. I just told you that to do codev, you need to put a lot of effort, right? So, anyone that is doing that without not really knowing why is going to complain at some point. And no matter on which side you are, my advice is to have that conversation, talk to that person. So that would be my first tip, is to spread the why. Okay? Have that conversation, but make sure to stay humble. I mean, maybe it's very obvious to you why this codev partnership is happening, but there's people that will not know. Okay, next is trust. And again, we're talking about a relationship, right? So if you think of the best relationships in your life, they're all based on a certain degree of trust. So how does that work in codev? The first point that I want to address is that by and large, these codev relationships are asymmetrical. And there's usually a studio that is defining the direction and the studio or more studios that are supporting this direction. At Ubisoft, those are called lead studio and collab studio. So those are the terms I tend to use. And naturally, in any asymmetrical relationship, trust is difficult, right? It's the same reason we struggle with our bosses or with politicians. They have more decision power. So when we're faced with difficulties, what we do first is we question the underlying intent on the other side, right? So the collab studio may ask stuff like, hey, are they really interested in our input? Or do they even want us on this project? But the lead studio also asks questions. It will ask questions like, will they deliver on time? Or are they making any effort to understand the direction? And I have a few tips for addressing this. The first one is just be conscious about this. Be conscious about our own bias. So pointing fingers at the other side is the easy way out, but doesn't really do anything, right? So instead of the previous questions, let's try to change it a bit. Let's be on the shoes of the collab studio. And instead of those, ask stuff like, what can we do to make our input more visible? Or what can we do to be indispensable to this project? And if you're on the lead studio side, you might ask, what can we do to make expectations clearer? And what can we do to make our direction widely visible? And there's plenty more examples of this. So if you're struggling because you're feeling that your counterparts don't trust you, just take a hard look in the mirror. When was the last time you've shown that you trust them? So that's the tip. Focus on we, not on they, to build trust. Okay, quick question. Is this person building the bridge or destroying the bridge? It's a bit hard to tell, right? But hopefully you're getting my point. My second advice is to always assume positive intent. We're not working in the same place. And even if we were, there's always things we miss. So if we can't get all the context, we need to make some assumptions. But it's our choice to make those assumptions negative or positive. And also here, let's just take a moment to remember we're all making video games, right? So what, by and large, is the intent of anyone's decision? Is to make awesome games, actually. So that makes everything a lot easier. Cool. The last one. Let's remember we are solving really complex problems. We wouldn't expect to assemble a hiking group today and 1 month from now go climb Mount Everest, right? But we do a bit of that when we do codev. Everyone's a bit impatient. Hey, can we do more? And my advice is just to be comfortable knowing that building trust takes time. It requires patience, requires practicing together. It requires even, failing together. And I have a cool example from my career. I was working on Assassin's Creed Origins, right? And we did have some issues that probably came from lack of trust from both sides. But here's where it's getting interesting. Both teams were clearly very invested in this relationship. So actually, by the time I joined the team, these teams had already been working together since Black Flag. And that's not all. Actually, after I left, they continued to work on Assassin's Creed Valhalla. Now, think of the amount of time that these teams have been working together. It's really a big deal. They have spent a lot of time figuring out all those issues. And when I call my friends in Sofia, they say, hey, it's going great. Doesn't surprise me after 10 years. Okay, after trust, let's talk about the next level, and that's expectation. And by this I mean finding the exact level of collaboration both sides want to have, as well as the desired outcome. So I want to talk to you first about your best friend at this level, the working agreement. Now, there are different forms of this document across the industry, but the idea is generally the same. You want to have the expectations clear for the codev partnership. So remember, it's an agreement. And that means all involved parts are supposed to sign off and stay committed to it. So what expectations do you want to make sure to write down? You want to focus on a few different questions. That's the what, the who, the when, and the how. So let's go one by one. Let's talk about the what. This is the actual deliverable, okay, that we're going to get as an outcome. And in the context of game development, we can roughly split them in terms of size. Something like this. It's not really important, just a way to guide us. You could be working on a feature, helping an engineering team doing a feature. You could do the entire feature, or you could be proposing features. Okay, so typically in your working agreements, you're going to have some variation of this, or one of these levels. That's great, cool, but let's remember what we're doing. We make video games, right? So that's not the full picture. We know how this works. We spend months developing something only to find out, oh, this was the wrong thing, so we need to do something else. So, of course, this also happens all the time in code dev. We start, we agree, we're going to do this thing, and soon after, we're doing this other thing. And the agreement is staying the same. So, it's okay to do something else. That's video games. We're not going to change that. It's part of the process. What's not okay is to pretend that nothing changed and to continue with the original working agreement. And unfortunately, that does tend to happen. So the what will change, so should the agreed expectations. The whole working agreement should depend on what exactly you're setting out to do. So if that changes, you should revisit everything else. Now about who? It's about assigning roles and responsibilities. And there's multiple frameworks you can use. I'm going to talk about RACI, but it could be anything else. And what you want to do is you break down the different components of the project, and you want to identify who's responsible for this component, who's accountable, who's consulted, and who's informed, roughly, okay? There are multiple ways to do this, so this talk is not about that. It's about that there are certain ways of doing that are better for code dev. This is a great example of what you don't want. If you look at all these dependencies, nobody can go forward unless they consult with everyone else. Okay, so this is not what I meant on putting extra effort. Okay, yes, you're expected to put extra effort, but it's all about balance. The value you're getting out of this collaboration should always outweigh the effort that you're putting into it. So how do you do that? Okay, going back to this terrible example, the total effort here is just very high. So you want to go from this to something like this. And here you have people dedicated to make the collaboration work. Those people do need to collaborate closely, but then the rest of the teams are autonomous. So this could be lead developers or producers. And that's very intentional. The point is that you should move the effort upwards in the organization. So that's the tip. You should limit cross-studio decision paths, and you should apply more effort at the top. Next, we talk about when. Sure, this will be a delivery date somewhere in the agreement, typically a bit more than that. Maybe there's some milestones. Here's alpha, here's beta. And there's one more thing I would like to suggest to add, either to the agreement or to documents associated with it. So let's imagine this is the total developer time that someone spends on this project. And these are all the situations where this person was blocked. They were waiting for a decision from someone on the other side. It can be due to different things. Maybe it's a code review, or maybe they need design feedback, or there's an art review ongoing. Good news, we already fixed the majority of this problem the step before because we removed a lot of these. Okay? You don't need to go to the other side to move forward. But there's still a bit more we can do, which is we should try to make these even shorter. And how you do that is you write down very clear expectations of how long each of these processes is allowed to take. This could be any code review needs to take 2 days or less, or any design feedback should be done within 5 days, or any art review within 4 days. Maybe these are silly numbers, that's not the point. So, you want to make sure you're very specific on when to expect an outcome. This should not be a responsibility of each individual developer every time they request for something. I don't want to go and ask for a code review and say, hey, please get back to me in 2 days. That shouldn't be my role. That's not going to feel good to anyone. It should be pre-agreed, and everyone should be clear with this. What about how? So this is all about defining the processes for the teams to make progress. And again, I have a cool example from my career. So I told you I worked on AC Syndicate doing bug fixing and polish, and here's how we actually worked. The team in Quebec would do the general bug triage first and put them all in a board that was like Sophia candidates. So then we would go in this board, each of us, and we would just pick them one by order of priority. We would work on fixes. Most of them we could review locally. Some of them would have to go to Quebec. And one aspect that helped a lot is that their documentation was fantastic, actually. They had really, really good design docs, which meant that we, as a team, we didn't work on the project. Remember that. We joined in polish. We didn't know anything about it. We were able to access these docs and see, oh, so this is how this feature is supposed to work, so we know how to fix it. And in turn, that just made us work almost completely asynchronously. So, of course, that made it easier to go fast. So that's the tip. Find all the places where the how can be made asynchronous and go for it. Wherever you can. Be critical. Okay, we're done with the pyramid, but there's one more thing I want to talk about, and that's rituals. So you can think of rituals as particular actions that impact the whole code-dev partnership. That's why they're not part of the pyramid. They can be applied anywhere. Let's talk about some examples at each of these levels. There are more. So at the motivational level, remember why we're all here. We care. And guess what? People on the other side care too. So anything you can do to show that you recognize that people on the other side are doing a great job goes a long way to increase the motivation. So a few months ago, we shipped this new content distribution feature for TFT. It's called Treasure Realms. And the project was led by a different team, by a team in LA. And my team in Singapore was helping with part of the launch features. It was a few months of work. The team really came together to make it happen. It was like our first feature together, right? So it's quite special to us. And we were happy about it, sure, but there was such a nice touch at the end of this collaboration. We got this note from the producer on the other side. And you may think, oh, that's such a simple message. Does that really do anything? Yes, it does. It stays in my desk, actually. This is a picture from my desk. And I love looking at it. It's a great reminder of why we're doing this. So do celebrate highs together, and don't just do it separately. You're more than one team working on a very high value thing. Then moving on to the trust level, there's a lot you can do. There are many activities we already do at the local level to foster trust. Typically, these funny team building activities that nobody likes, but they actually work. Now, of course, you can meet in person. That's the best. I guess that's not surprising, but it costs a lot of money, right? So the good news is we know how to do this remotely. Actually, when we went through COVID and we were forced to try a lot of these things even locally, well, it's the same idea. You can do team building activities remotely, and you can do it cross studios. But I want to talk about one other thing that I think is a bit trickier to get right, which is when things don't go well. We already saw that the tendency is for people to start pointing fingers at each other, right? Maybe you're in this talk, you care about learning, you probably read a few motivational books. And those books tell us, hey, failures are actually great opportunities to learn. Cool, so we can do the same here. As long as both sides are committed to improve, it should be possible to have a good conversation about it and improve, right? So what you want is to embrace the lows and stick together through them. And for me, I very distinctively remember this particular project where things went south really fast. Both parts were disappointed at the end of it. It didn't turn out well. The feature didn't work very well. It was not well received. So when we went to that retro, I was quite nervous. We sat down, and I wanted to make sure this didn't turn into a finger-pointing fight. And guess what happened? Actually, people from both sides were very, very careful about being respectful, but they were also very, very careful about saying these hard truths. And people recognized that, they accepted them, and we got better. We got better as a team, and the other side also got better. Now, at the expectation level, the main obstacle we're going to face is lack of visibility. And this is just not something we're used to think about, because when we work in the local context, this thing kind of solves itself. We don't really worry too much. And let's say you're a designer working on a core feature, and you just finished working on an important update. In a local context, you mention it in sprint review, everyone that needs to know about it is in the room, done. This works. But in a codev environment, that's really not enough. So you're for sure going to miss that one person on the other side of the world that's building a feature that depends on your design decision. So what can you do? I have two answers, a simple one and a complicated one. The simple one is go ahead and overdo it. Okay? Just say it a million times. Say it in multiple formats. Say it as if people really wouldn't understand what you're saying. So if you're that designer, try all these, post it in different Slack channels, make some documentation, etc., etc. Now, the better answer is you actually want to be more deliberate in your communication. It's not really about saying more, it's about saying the exact amount of information that the other person is going to need to be productive. And that's going to optimize both your time and the other person's time. Now, I just want to be conscious that this is actually very difficult to do, especially in codev, because you don't know the other side. You don't know who you're going to be talking to, so it's very hard to know what they actually need to know. And in my experience, that's also not where most people are. Most people are not wanting to communicate. They severely under-communicate, so you have a much bigger problem than this. So what I would say is you aim for deliberate communication, sure, try to go there, but accept over-communication as a first step. And this is going to be a lot better than the usual environment we have, which is no information at all. Okay, I'm just about to wrap up, so let me go through everything I said in one go. So for motivation, you want to spread the why. For trust, focus on we, not they, to build trust. Always assume positive intent, and be comfortable knowing that building trust takes time. For expectations, the what will change, and so should the agreed expectations. Limit cross-studio decision paths, apply more effort at the top. Be specific on when to expect an outcome, and find all the places where the how can be made asynchronous. Finally, for rituals, celebrate highs together, embrace the lows and stick together through those, and aim for deliberate communication, but accept over-communication. So here we are. At this point, we have everything in place. We know why we do codev. We trust and are trusted by our codev partners. When we have expectations in our partnership that set us up for success, and we maintain this partnership through strong rituals. So I hope at this point you agree with me, we don't have to keep watching this old movie, right? We have the tools and the power to watch something else instead. Okay, let's try this one. It's Friday evening, and Sam is just about to leave work. There's no notification. Casey did see Sam's update, but he knows She's on the other side of the world, and it's the end of the day, so he respects that. So he writes it down and schedules it for later, for Monday morning. Sam arrives on Monday morning and sees Casey's message. And it says something like this: "Hi Sam, great work on that update. I particularly appreciated the way you communicated the impact our team had in your project." So you see, Sam and Casey had been working together for months, because before they started development, they had the right rituals in place to know that they had the same goals. There was more to Casey's message. "Hey, I noticed you moved your shipping date, and this would have an impact on my team's timeline. Would you be available to discuss this in a call?" So clearly, even though a lot has improved, that doesn't mean everything is perfect. And that's okay. Something changed in the expectation, so there's a need to realign on the agreement. So Sam looks for a slot in the calendar. There's no need for 10 people to make a decision because the working agreement is clear. Sam and Casey have full autonomy. That makes it easy. Sam is able to schedule a meeting for the next day. The next day, they both attend the meeting. They trust the other side when hearing possible options, and they both accept some trade-offs, but they're ultimately happy with the outcome. Months later, it's the launch date for Sam's feature, and it's on a whole other level than what she had hoped for. Sam and Casey are happy, their teams are happy, but more important than that, players got something truly special. And that's what we're all here for, isn't it? That's it. Thank you very much. Okay, a bit early, awesome. Do you have any questions? Yes.
Hi, yeah, fantastic talk, thanks so much for that. I just wonder with those lines of communication, do you ever find that there are some organic communications that do happen with people at like lower levels sometimes in teams? And do you find that you actually need to, is it important to like stop that and make sure that they actually are happening through that lead level? Or do you sometimes let those like lower level communications happen organically?
Okay, let me try to rephrase that. So you're wondering if it's okay to let those lines of communication that happen at the report level, or you would always want to push them up. So actually, those lines of communication should stay there. This was not about communication. This was about decision. So you should definitely be talking about those things regularly. That helps with other stuff. Actually, like, hey, here's an update from this feature. What do you think about it? Awesome. What you don't want is, here's an update for this feature. Can you approve it before I proceed? More questions? Oh, sorry. Yes?
Do you have any experience to draw from when you say you have a bulk of the team that is working locally, and then you have like just a handful of people who are in different time zones and remote, and how do you make sure those people don't get forgotten as you don't have very parallel channels?
So the question is, how do you deal with scenarios where you have most of the people locally, but then you have maybe a few that are remote? This is, I guess, a bit different than what I talked about today. So this is more like two teams working separately. But I think a lot of what I said applies to that. So stuff about visibility, stuff about trust, making sure your rituals are inclusive of everyone. This largely applies. But yeah, I would say you would need to adapt a lot of things that I mentioned today. It's slightly different when it's two separate teams versus one or two people that are isolated. Yes?
I was just wondering if you ever worked in a context where there were either work culture or sort of cultural differences between places that might change the way you approach how to build that trust and how to sort of work through that.
I think I would say it's always the case, almost always the case, because if you're across countries, it's a guarantee. And if you're across companies that are very protective of their culture, which is usually the case in game companies, this is going to happen. Sorry, I realized I didn't repeat the question, which was how do you deal with cross-culture differences in applying these tips? I would say just be cautious about that. It's gonna happen. There's gonna be that one person on your team that's gonna say something that is really fall wrongly on the other side. And I think what we need to remember is, yes, we have these different cultures. Most likely nobody is doing this out of a bad intention. It's gonna happen and it's gonna feel bad, but we can talk about it and say, oh, hey, we noticed you were upset about this thing. Let's try to understand why you got upset and so we can improve next time and maybe we don't do this kind of stuff. So I think if you think about it, it's kind of an example of the kind of things I'm saying. If you assume positive intent from the other side, and this person says something to you that's really like, oh God, that's not okay. You don't assume this person is mean or anything. You just assume this person doesn't realize it. But let's have that conversation because this is not okay from my side of the culture. Yes?
When going from like a sort of the manager down structure that you're going for, how do you deal with sharing very sort of niche sets of knowledge that are useful for both teams?
So the question is, going down from a managerial approach to communication to going to down, how do you manage the different streams of communication to make sure that they're still happening?
Yeah, like if there was like two networking engineers, for
Yeah.
example, who are doing very sort of like tangential things, how do you facilitate the communication between them?
Right. So I think that's similar to that first question, where you want to limit it's not the communication, it's the decision making, right? So if you have one network engineer here and another network engineer there, you do want them to be talking together, and potentially you want to create rituals just for them. So actually, I went through one of those when I joined Skull and Bones. They had this ritual, which was the network champions. And what this was is it gathered everyone that was working on network, and we would meet like every week to talk about that. And this is kind of cross teams, cross projects, cross locations. And that's really good, that's really important. Yes?
I don't know if this is outside your scope, what your content is. Sometimes you come across that one introvert that does not want to do any rituals, any team, anything, don't want to go to holidays or anything.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's also like a similar but different is when one person is isolated and they're excluded just from pure differences. How do you approach those?
Right. So I think there's two questions. One is how do you deal with people that are introverted and may not be willing to go through a lot of this? And how do you deal with people that are isolated and it's difficult for them to go through this? Is that right? So the first case, people that are introverted, I tend to think of it like this. It's totally fine to be introverted. There's a certain level of expectation that is still expected of you. So if you have trouble maybe doing presentations, that's okay, you don't need to do them. But if you can update the team on your Slack channels or different ways that might work, that is important. And I would say that's how you can try to manage it. It's not to change the style of this person or change how this person is comfortable doing, but tell them the value of these things, like how important it is to the teams that this actually happens. So they can find maybe their own way of doing it that still makes it happen. For the other case, for isolation, this is, I think, more on the responsibility of the manager, is to identify that, like this person is having a lot of trouble communicating with the rest of the team. We need maybe to do more stuff together. We need to make sure we have the channel set up for this person to intervene. there's a lot that can be done there. Did that answer?
Yeah, I think I've met a lot of introverts that are misanthropic.
Yeah. I get it. I'm an engineer, so. Okay, no more questions? Yes.
Just on the back of that, do you have any team building exercises that are virtual that sort of aren't cringeworthy, I guess? Anything sort of working with us?
So I'm just in the process of proposing that to my current team. I am not sure if it's gonna be cringeworthy or not. I did try one during COVID, so not this context again. It was only in my team, but we didn't know each other because we got hired at different times during COVID. And that was very simple, definitely cringeworthy. It was a virtual escape room, and it's silly, it's funny, everyone's laughing, there's technical issues. By the end of it, everyone is just having a good time still. So I do recommend cringeworthy team building activities. All right, no more questions? Awesome, thank you.